Alan, Darby, Jacqueline Martinez. This is the Buyer's Boardroom. Learn the most about who you are today and where you want to be after.
All right. Welcome back to the Buyer's Boardroom.
Hey, Jacqueline.
How are we doing, Alan?
I'm doing good.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited for today. A little bit of a different take on the day. Run through a top 10 list.
Yeah, this is I love the
10
name.
things.
10 things that
Yeah.
make your baby ugly.
I love it.
We did one before. I think it was one of our first shows where we talked about the things that make you attractive to buyers. So I think it's why don't we flip it around a little bit and let's tell them what makes you ugly to buyers.
Yeah,
What
why
are
not?
things
Yeah, that was a good episode. Matt Cooper,
Yeah.
shout out to Matt Cooper at Beacon Point.
Awesome.
Perfect. Well, maybe before we jump into the top 10 list too, I mean, ties into one of the items on the list, but just been thinking about lately kind of an abundance of sellers that are wanting to get started in our process, which is fantastic, but some of them having an investment centric business, sometimes an SMA or a general partner model for their fund, and they really believe that it's foundational to their value proposition to clients.
Yep.
And also believe it should command a premium in the market when they go to trade the RIA. But typically it's really funds that, they've been in business for over 5 years on the fund side and have maybe 50 to 75 million of assets, and it's really all reliant on a handful of people.
Cross-pollination between their RIA and their investment management strategy, whatever structure that strategy is being housed in. And look, we're not here to poo-poo like their investment strategy or anything unique that they think that they're doing. But everything that we're talking about is always through the lens of acquisition. And the reality is, one, if you're an investment management centric practice, it's generally not as appealing to buyers because the vast majority of buyers, I would say, are like holistic financial planning, that's like embedded in their core values, and not, they obviously manage money too, but that's not what they lead with. And so if you're leading with an investment management centric value proposition, it just really shrinks down the buyer pool. And then where it becomes problematic is if it's like in a fund structure, if it's a general partnership. We find a lot of those structures, their holdings typically have illiquid, features. They might be private placements or real estate or some type of investment directly into companies, and it's just hard to unwind. And so don't be surprised if you're doing something like that when you're seeking to transact, that the buyers will just outright not be interested, or B, require that you unwind that before transacting, or at least on some kind of structured unwinding post transaction. They just don't want the risk associated with it. I would also say, if you have some kind of investment strategy or thesis, a lot of sellers, they're hopeful that the buyer will take that strategy and like put it on their platform and open it up to other advisors that are a part of their firm. And that's usually a non-starter. Like there are some buyers who might be looking to expand their investment platform and so forth, and they could be interested in something like that. But in general, don't be surprised that the buyer isn't overly thrilled with whatever investment philosophy that you're espousing, and trying to implement through a very specific strategy. It's just not something they're seeking in general. Our guest today is going to be Jason Gordo. Modern Wealth.
Yes, Modern Wealth Management.
Former colleague of yours and mine, going back to our United Capital days. He's a great guy in general, very witty, very, very funny. So I can't wait to hear his take on what makes your baby ugly.
Absolutely.
All right. Number 10. What is number 10?
Number 10, we've got where the seller staff are change resistors. And I would even go so far as saying mean, and this can really shine in the transition process when the work is hard and tedious and they're working on going to clients, and they may have their own fears about what life will be like on the other side of the close, but it can really manifest in these ways, and it can like really get in the way of getting to a close.
We actually had this happen where it was post LOI, And we had already met the team of this particular seller and interviewed one-on-one this particular individual. But in the transition prep process, let's say post LOI leading to a closing, the buyer started to get like really irritated with this person who was, as you say, mean, a little bit demeaning in the conversations, very short, curt, just clearly not. The buyer wasn't feeling like this person was going to be on the northbound train. Let's just say it that way. And it almost killed the deal. The buyer actually called us and said, "Look, if this doesn't get remedied, we are going to walk from the transaction."
Right.
So it's something to be aware of, I think, as a seller. And this is why we advocate for getting the team involved early in the process, so that any kind of fears, any kind of concerns that the staff has can be resolved. And we find, like, if you get them involved early, and it's debatable on when that timing is, but they actually get excited about the transaction, and so. But you really need to be if you have someone on your team that is a tough person to deal with, and is a change resistor, as we said, we might want to prep them for this, and make sure that we get ahead of any issues. So I would say number 10 on the list is staff that are change resistors or have attitude problems, let's say. All right.
Um,
All right.
Perfect.
Number
Okay.
9.
Number 9. So when the owners are, let's call it 60
Like an
plus
aged
years
owner.
old,
Yes.
aged owner, and also no strong generation 2 in place either.
Yeah, this is kind of ties into people when they ask us, like, when should we start exploring, knowing that let's say everyone is going to transact at some point. But when is the right time for you to start looking at it seriously? Interestingly, we did this one time. We looked at our average client partner age, and it was around 51.
Mhm.
So it probably
Mhm.
surprises a lot of people who think, I'm going to wait till I'm 60, 62, 65, call it a year away from retiring, and that's when I'm going to sell my business. No, bad plan, because think about it. The buyer is inheriting your succession issue. And it's a business that's revenue is tied to clients. And so they're concerned that if you're not there, that revenue might be impaired or put at risk. And so I would say that and not that you can't transact at 60 years of age or older, but I would expect there to be a heightened sense of concern around that transition. Expect your deal terms might be structured a bit differently. For example, they may have a longer retention period tied to the transaction, where they're not paying you the cash upfront or in 12 months, like a standard retention period is maybe strung out over 2, 3, 4 years, because they're worried about the clients exiting if you were to leave. So, and you bring up a good point on the Gen 2. It's okay if you're older, if you have Gen 2, if you have those advisors who are in their 30s, 40s, et cetera. But if you're 60 years or older and you don't have Gen 2, you probably want to start now, and be prepared for the buyer to have maybe some heightened concern around that retention of clients post acquisition. So
I would add to you on that as well. It's not just the advisor's age that's the concern. It's that the client base is likely, like, what comes with that usually is the client base is of a similar age. They're in distribution mode, and
yeah,
that's
no, good point.
that impacts the returns on the
Good
deals.
point. Well,
Right.
I would actually say that on average, clients are, like, call it 5 to 10 years older than their advisor.
Exactly.
So if you're 60, we would expect your clients are probably 65, 70 or older. And it's really hard to put a number on it, but just that younger clients are better than older clients because of the length of time that they're expected to be around. And so, yeah, good point. If you're 60 years or older, you probably have an older client base too. And how do you get around an older client base? Well, you have relationships with their kids, their grandkids. So,
Exactly.
if you have an aged client base, you want to work real hard to establish relationships with their children and grandchildren. Okay, that's number 9. Let's go to number 8. What do we have?
Number 8, we've got no desire to grow. which can be tricky because I think like as we're getting to know folks and they may be burned out, they're thinking about growing in the current environment where they're wearing other hats. Presumably they're the compliance officer, they're overseeing financials being produced, all the things. But trying to separate that, okay, if all of these things were freed up, would I have a desire to grow
Yeah.
then? And you want to be transparent about how you want to spend your time. If you really don't want to grow the business anymore and you're looking to exit, that's fine, but be transparent about it. And that will command a certain type of offer and a certain type of buyer that is looking to invest in the
Well,
business
this
then.
kind of goes with the aged owner thing, because when you're younger, you typically have more of an appetite to grow. As you get, let's be honest, if you're a year away from retiring, you really don't have an appetite to grow. And even if you said you did,
Right.
then no one would believe you. So it's like, but it is important. Keep in mind, like there's a talent acquisition. I would say first and foremost, buyers are trying to acquire talent, so they don't want you to
Mhm.
leave. But where they make the return from is post-acquisition growth. That's the primary source of buyers' return on their investment, is watching their new partners double their business in 3, 4, 5. That's where they make their return. So they would be very leery of a firm coming on where the partners were articulating a lack of desire to grow. Now, we talked about this a lot on our previous podcast. When they say grow, they don't mean grow by working 30, 40 hours more a week, or
Right.
by loading you up with clients that make your client service, sacrificed. What they mean is growth in their world, where they're removing operational burdens. They're surrounding you with, practice management expertise, new services, people, resources, all that kind of thing. So it's growth in their world. And so it's very important. Now, as to your point, if you don't have a desire to grow, we need to say so. We need to be very transparent with the buyer,
Mhm.
so there's no expectations. But all things being equal, saying that you're not interested in growth at all is probably a turnoff for most buyers. So that would be
Mhm.
number 8. Okay, perfect.
Mhm.
All right, number
Number
7.
7. So, client concentration risk. I was thinking recently about one of our buyers reached out to us. They were evaluating a deal, not sourced through us, but just as a sounding board. And the firm had a client that was 50% of the overall revenue, and thinking about how to
Yeah,
structure that, and that's a tricky one to work through, which can be solved through retention payments and other things, but
yeah.
it makes your
Yeah,
baby
it makes your
ugly.
baby
Yeah.
ugly. But what would be the threshold you would say of client concentration? Like, where does it start? Where, if you had a client that represented X percent of your revenue, when does it start to get problematic?
I think I would say anything over 10% of your total revenue is starts
That's the
to
question.
get into tricky
Yeah, they're
zone.
gonna want to
Yeah.
know about anybody over 10%. That'd be the number that I would set to.
Mhm.
And they're gonna want to know, explore the relationship. How long have they been there? What other points of relation do you have, like within their family, perhaps? So, like if it's let's say it's the parents, they want to know, do you have relationships with the kids, or do you have other types of ties to that client, that if something were to happen to that client, it could be a death, disability, that revenue wouldn't be in jeopardy. So client
Mhm.
concentration would definitely be number 7. Okay, number
Okay.
6.
So tying back to our intro here, but any general partner, private
Yeah.
placement,
Well,
sponsor type of role.
here,
Yeah.
the opening we were talking about, it was kind of like a combo, like investment management centric. You have an investment strategy, like you want to have the buyer take and maybe out spread across our platform,
Deploy.
deploy. And we mentioned the general partner. Here I want to make a specific point: is if it's a private placement general partnership, like a hedge fund, or some type of structure, um, that is a really big turnoff. Like
Mhm.
I'm struggling to even think of a buyer that would say, yes, that's something we're interested in. We have seen on rare occasions buyers permit it to exist post
Mhm.
acquisition. But in the vast majority of situations, the buyer will say either no, just outright, we're not interested in that. Or 2, we've got to get rid of it. We have to have either pre transaction or post transaction a plan of unwinding that, and expect the buyer to have like disclosures and things like that embedded in the deal, where they're not accepting any liability or risk as a result of potential lawsuits that if they ever came out of that private placement.
That's
So
right.
and this is something like on occasion I encounter firms, and they're building their business, and they'll mention, yeah, we're getting ready to launch this hedge fund, and I just tell them, like, dear God, please don't do that. It's like, and
Hmm.
again, my advice is purely through the lens of what makes you attractive, or in this case, makes your baby ugly, on the M&A front. And general partnerships, private placements, definitely makes your baby super, super ugly. So okay,
Uh,
number five.
all right. Coming in at number 5, we have product mix. So here, thinking about the percentage of non-recurring revenue, commissionable business that you have as a percentage of total revenue. And here I would peg it kind of similar to the client concentration risk. Anything above 10% of the total revenue that's non-recurring, upfront
Yeah,
commissions, life insurance, whatever it might be. Um, Makes you overall less attractive for the majority of buyers that we work with, where it's predominantly RA, non-insurance focused, that
yeah.
sort of thing.
And we do,
Yeah,
to your point, like, we 80 plus buyers now, I think. And so we definitely have a number of buyers who do risk management, otherwise known as insurance. And
absolutely.
they're interested in that business, but the majority are not. So the majority of buyers in the independent space are, it's called fee only, or if they are a hybrid, meaning they permit broker dealer or insurance, it's sort of like a accommodation for legacy business. It's to accommodate those firms who maybe 10 years ago were doing insurance or brokerage business. They decided to move to a fee model, but they still have this component of their business that's locked up in these products that they can't get rid of for tax reasons or penalties or whatever the case may be. And so the buyer will say, okay, we'll permit you to continue having that broker dealer license, but no more new business. It's just to accommodate the existing clients. And so,
Hmm.
but if you are doing risk management business, we're not saying that that's a showstopper for you. You just have to find a buyer that is interested in that line of business. But the point that you made is, like, when does it become problematic? It's when you're, I think, when you're over 10% non-recurring revenue, it's going to cause them to have questions. So they're going to start to poke and prod and to look at the nature of your business, and they want to make sure we're not pushing products. We want to make sure that we're not, and just an insurance hawking type of business. They are interested in the fiduciary fee model, understanding that risk management is a big part of that. And if you're doing holistic planning, you're going to uncover those types of needs. But they're going to say that there are fee-based versions of those products as well as the commission stuff. So if you're identifying those needs, you might want to use those types of products instead of the commission versions of them. So um, non-recurring revenue greater than 10% is going to make your baby ugly. Or I wouldn't say as ugly as some of the other things, but just we have to plan around that. So okay,
Absolutely.
number 4.
So getting in, yeah, top 4. These are like, I would say 5 through 10, those are things that deal terms can solve for. But the top 4, these are really gating issues that many buyers will just opt out of being part of a sale process
Yeah,
altogether over. So these are the spicy ones. So number 4, compliance disclosures. Now we're talking at the ADV level, something that has risen to the extent where it needs to be flagged as a disclosure at the buyer's ADV
not
level rather than just the individual level.
like if you have
Yeah,
something in your past compliance wise that the buyer
right.
would have to then disclose on their ADV if they acquired you. Is that what you mean? Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
So that would be
Yes,
things like
exactly.
securities violations, right?
Right.
Suspensions.
Exactly.
Like the more severe compliance issues. It's a major thing that we try to identify very early in our process when we're working with a potential seller. Is if they have compliance issues, we need to very quickly get to the bottom of what the degree of seriousness is. We often have engaged legal counsel to give us their opinions on the compliance matter,
Hmm.
because it's a massive showstopper for a lot of buyers. We have, I would say, a large number of buyers that are squeaky clean, like their ADVs have no disclosures, right? And so they're evaluating. They're not saying you're a bad person if you have disclosures. They're saying that if we have to port that disclosure onto our ADV, that could damage our enterprise value. And so they're looking at kind of like the risk reward of bringing you on, right? They might want you as a
Right.
partner and think you're awesome and the firm is awesome, some of them they would otherwise acquire, but the damage it does to their enterprise value outweighs that. And so they'll just pass,
Right.
And so we
Yeah.
have a large number of buyers who give us sort of like their parameters around this. And we just know if they have this type of disclosure, this buyer is off the table. Like they're not even going to.
Mhm.
So that's something that if you have disclosures, it is problematic, and it will definitely shape who the buyers that you would need to talk to, removing those that are just have no desire to take on those types of ADV disclosures.
Absolutely.
Got it. Okay,
Perfect.
number 3. This is a big one for me.
Number 3. So this is EBITDA margins when they're north of
Yep.
60%. And the concern here is really, are you investing enough in the business? Do you have enough resources already to handle the current capacity, to take the business to the next level? And will the valuation support that? And oftentimes we have buyers that just on that fact alone do not want to be part of a sale
Yeah.
process because they don't have confidence in the business being able to support the next level of
Yeah,
growth.
this is one that for a lot of sellers is bewildering. And it's
Yes.
very tough for them to understand because, like, for example, we had one recently, it was 85% EBITDA margin. Pretty sizable business, Now, they weren't growing, right? They had like 3 or 4 years of just flat or slightly negative growth. The owners were just maxed out capacity wise, but they were quite proud of their profitability. They're like, we're wickedly profitable. We're going to just make a ton on the sale because of our EBITDA margins.
Mhm.
And we had to be sort of the bearer of bad news and say, no, that your EBITDA margins are so high. So what is a normal EBITDA margin? What would you say is a good, and I'm going to use the word healthy, which sounds sort of like weird that we're saying high EBITDA margins are not healthy. But
Mhm.
we're going to get to why. But like, what would you say is a healthy EBITDA margin?
I would say in the
Yeah.
40s.
I would say
Yeah.
you're pretty good.
Yeah.
No one's going to raise an eye at any EBITDA margin, say 35% to maybe 55%. You're not going
Yeah.
to get really a lot of questions about that. When you start getting around 60%, 65, 70, red flags just start coming up because it's to your point, they're looking at this and saying, we can't grow this business. This business is taking all the cash out. They're not investing in people. They're not investing in technology. They're not investing in marketing, and so they're pretty much capped out where they're at. And so the last thing that we want to do as a buyer is overpay for a business that's not going to grow.
Right.
And you might say, well, that's the buyer's problem to help invest in us and give us the resources, infrastructure. That is true. They will do that, but they're not going to overpay and do that. They're not going
Yeah.
to pay you at that really high margin and then have to come back and allocate all of these resources to fix your problem of not being able to grow because you haven't invested in the business. You can't get it both ways. So what happens when you have those super high EBITDA margins is the buyer is going to allocate some cost into your P&L, right? They're going to look at it and say, what do we need to do to invest in this business? It could be additional personnel. It could be allocating marketing dollars. It could be allocating new tech spend. But that margin that you have is likely going to be reduced by the buyer saying we're going to allocate these costs because we think this is what it needs to unlock this growth potential that's not there now with those super high margins. So it's a really big deal. And I know it's difficult for some people to hear that and maybe disappointing, but it's real because the
Right.
buyers are probably on that 35, 40% EBITDA margin themselves. So you can imagine
Right.
how odd it is for them to look into business and they're like, we're growing at 20, 30% a year, right? And our EBITDA margins are 35%. You know, there's
Mhm.
no way we're going to be able to grow this business 30% a year at 85% EBITDA margins. Does not happen. Yeah. So
Right.
it's something, yeah,
Just a different
big
world.
deal, big deal. Okay. Number two,
Perfect.
number two, this is a big one.
Yes. So lack of net new asset, or sometimes you'll hear organic growth. So this is the total change in your assets, but isolating out market change. So just inflows minus outflows from new and existing clients. For context, industry average, they say, is like 2 to 3%. So if we're below that, then it starts to point to other reasons. Is there a willingness to grow? Number 8 that we had there. And some buyers altogether, they will not invest in a business that isn't at least growing at industry averages. And even some of them want to see, high single digits plus in order to get involved, because they're focused on their returns and they know that they can accelerate growth, but they want to have a healthy baseline to start from.
Well, as our good friend Pat McLean said, the best predictor of future growth is your historic growth. And so what we mean by net new assets is basically your year-over-year revenue or asset growth rate after removing the stock market's impact. So we get this all the time where someone will say, yeah, we're growing at 20% a year. And then when we back out the market, they're actually -3. And so you can't use or impute the stock market's impact to your growth rate in this calculation. We have to remove that. And so and also, client defections, terminations, things like that. Those are all negatively impacting this growth rate. I mean, if you added 20 million of assets, but lost 25 million, because clients fired you or withdrew money, from their accounts, right, that's not growth. So the massive thing that they want to see, and this is really big, as you mentioned, there are buyers that'll tell us they'll take one look at the net new asset rate, and if it's not their target, they'll just pass. They'll say, we're not interested. And those that will be interested to move forward, what you can expect is it'll be reflected in the valuation. So when we tell people what to expect in terms of the multiple, we quote a low, mid, and high range, and this is definitely one of the factors that goes into that. Where do you land on the range is your net new assets. And to your point, industry average is somewhere around 2 to 3%. So you need to at least be there, I think, and then hopefully higher. It's rare when we see someone like north of 10%. Those are unicorns. And I would expect a firm that's doing that, if everything else looks good, you would be anticipating to be on that high end of the valuation range. Okay, so that's net new assets. All right, number 1. Now this is going to surprise people. I think that we have this one at number 1, but to me, it's absolutely.
I know. I'll let you say it.
Perfect.
Right.
It's a big one. It is. Yeah. Okay. It is egos and attitude of the seller. A lack of willingness to change. So and that might surprise people, but it's clearly one of the things that derails transactions the most. Unfortunately, it's usually on behalf of the seller, not the buyer. Where the seller, they've built a business, they're very proud of their business, and you should be proud of your business if you built a good one. But when you're looking to partner with a larger firm, they've done a lot of wonderful things too. I mean, maybe you've done a few things better than them, but you're on average talking to firms that are 20, 30, $100 billion in size. So clearly, now bigger isn't always better, but they've figured things out along the way, technology, processes, client experience, investment platform, all of these things. And when the seller comes into it, this is how I hear it expressed a lot. They always say, "Oh yeah, we do that. We do that too." Yeah, it's like no, you don't do that. You don't. I mean, just because you're offering financial planning, for example, doesn't mean that you're offering it in the way that the buyer is, with the depth or maybe the articulated client experience, the verbiage they use, the technology they have to support it, the depth of things that they're offering to their client. So this is why I tell people the number 1 trait we look for is humility. It's okay to be proud of what you've built, but be humble about it. And when you're seeking to partner with a firm, recognize that they've done some amazing things, and just be willing to go into that partnership or conversation, I should say, and just be humble about what you've built compared to what they've built. And don't come to the table and say, "Oh yeah, we do that exact same thing," because it's likely not true. So and be willing, even in areas that you might not understand, be willing to change, be willing to take a new tact or a new approach to something. Now they've got to defend whatever they're asking you to do, change, or adopt. Why? and hopefully have data that supports the benefits of adopting whatever they're asking you to do. But I would say have an open mind and be willing to go down the road with them on whatever they're asking you to do, and until it like proves that it's not working or it's not a better approach. Then you have the right to
Right.
challenge it. So, ego, attitude, willingness to change. That would be our number one thing that makes your baby ugly. All the rest. So,
I love it.
yeah.
Well, with that, let's cut to your interview with Jason Gordo, co-founder of Modern Wealth
Yep.
Management.
All right, Alan Darby. Welcome, Jason Gordo, co-founder and president of Modern Wealth Management. Welcome to the Buyers Boardroom.
Thanks, man. Yeah, good to be here, and can't wait to have our discussion.
Yeah, well, just so everyone who's listening, Jason was the sponsor of, or the thought leader, I should say, of this episode. What things that make your baby ugly?
Not your child.
Not your real child.
Not your physical child, maybe your business child.
The number one thing that we had on our list was also the number one thing that you had on your list that you identified, which is seller ego, personality, conflicts, and things like that. I think that's well, one, we didn't like prep for that, but I thought it was awesome that that's the number one thing you landed on. And people don't realize that. They think it's like deal math. That's important, but it's not as important as making sure you're happy with somebody.
That's downstream stuff. Like the beginning is, are we going to like each other when this is over?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, it's funny. You call it the top 10 list. I have it as the dirty dozen.
Well, we're going to hear some of those as we go through this. Yeah. So what I thought I'd do is throw some questions at you, things that I think are thought-provoking, probably surprising. We haven't prepped for this, so it's going to be live and getting your real reaction to it. But, the whole thing about the Buyer's Boardroom is try to give people a sense of like what actually happens when you and your team get together inside, no external people are there. What are you guys talking about? Yeah. I've been in those meetings before, back at our time at United Capital. For those of you who don't know, Jason and I worked together at United for years. And I know what goes on, and it's really surprising for people. And so this is going to be great. I'm going to fire away with questions, and you're going to give me the behind.
I love it. I love the format, by the way. It's just random.
All right, so here we go. Let's open up with when you're evaluating a deal. I know you guys look at tons of deals every year. Yeah. They've done so before. Give me a sense of, I'm going to give you give me three things that you're immediately looking for. Like these are the things that intuitively you've got to ask these questions or get to the point before you're even interested in moving forward.
First, I would say in 2024, I just had the team pull this. We looked at 300 businesses in 2024, like had at least a first phone call with 300 businesses. And probably a third of those within 10 minutes, we knew this was, we'll give you a polite 30-minute call, but the last 20 minutes we're thinking about what we're having for lunch. It certainly wasn't, how are we going to come together with these people? So, all right, the top three, I mean, you started with it. It's advisor ego. It's, what is driving this person to have this conversation, and what are they going to be like on the other side of this partnership? Right. So hopefully they're looking at us doing the same, right? Like, are we going to be really compatible and get along? And I have a whole thing.
The reality is, people in general are going to be on their best behavior when they first meet you.
You'd be surprised.
If they do it in the first meeting, you can imagine what life is going to be like as a partner with this person.
Yeah, right. Like, and the way I described it this way this morning to a potential partner, and they said, "Well, when you say cultural fit, what do you mean?" Right. And I said, well, look, I'm going to give you an analogy. Let's just imagine I built a 40-bedroom household, and the bedrooms are amazing, by the way, right? And every time we bring a partner in, we're assigning them a bedroom, right? Each new partner gets a bedroom. So I have fewer and fewer bedrooms as time goes on, which means I have more and more roommates. And we're going to share the kitchen and the living room and the TV room, the dining room, and all the common areas. And we've got to agree on how we're going to care for those things. And if you want to listen to electric dance music on blast at 2 a.m., you're just not compatible with the rest of the house, right? That's not the type of roommate we're looking for. We're looking for somebody that goes to bed when we go to bed, get up when we get up, do the things we like to do, and we enjoy each other. And, Mike Capelli, one of my partners, he says it this way: we know we got compatible partners or cultural fit right when at the annual executive conference, everybody's fighting for the chairs as close to the leadership team as possible versus fighting for the chairs as far away from the leadership team as possible. So,
Yeah, how true that is. Well, I mean, it is ego, personality. We have a business that's wonderful people, but there's a lot of egos in it too.
Yeah, I
just
have an ego.
yeah,
It's okay.
and be willing to be a little humble. It's not that you're not proud of what you've built, but it's a people business. You're going to be on their team, and they want to make sure that you're not going to be a jerk.
Yeah,
Right?
that's right.
Okay,
so that's no EDM at 2 a.m.
All right, give me a second one. What do you think what are you looking for?
Yeah, business model. We went to we go to a lot of conferences. We were at the Schwab Impact Conference in November last year, and I looked out on the floor and I said, "Man, there's got to be 5,000 people here, and there's got to be 5,000 different business models here as well, right? We all do things differently. Everybody's doing their own thing. That's the beauty of the RIA space, right? You get to design that experience for the client. You get to design your business. You get to design your schedule and what you want your life to look and be like.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're wanting to allocate capital, and that's how you've built your business, right? Running money,
centric asset management.
Yeah, investment management, for example. That's just not the business that we're in. We'd be a misalignment of partners. We're looking for financial planning first, for people that are tax aware in their planning approach, people that are looking to have their money allocated by a centralized team, and they see themselves as a value creator in the client's life by being in front of the client and resolving conflict in the finances of this person or this couple, right? Solving financial problems for them, not getting into, I'll say the 15 factor large cap growth portfolio mindset of, do I buy Pepsi or Coke, or do I trade Intel and buy Nvidia? That's just a conflict of business model.
You're looking for alignment on your worldview of the role of the advisor.
That's right.
We see ourselves as planners first. Not that managing money is important, but it all is going to come out of a plan, not the opposite.
Right.
We meet firms that are looking to transact frequently, and they'll tell us they have no interest in planning. They don't see value in it. They're just here to manage money, and that's the problem for you.
Yeah, well, that's just not an attractive partner for us, right? That doesn't mean they're not attractive to somebody else. I think they've limited the universe of potential partners if that's what they're focused on.
Got it. Okay. All right. So that's number 2. You got a third that you would say you're scanning for right away?
Yeah, I'll give you, it's kind of a combo. The P&L, so profit and loss statement, and we can spend a whole episode just talking about that. And then I would say the next one that's adjacent to that would be lack of ownership alignment. And I think those two things tie together, P&L and lack of ownership alignment. In other words, the next generation in your office, right? If they're really, really important, you can't tell us it's our problem to solve and getting equity in their hands, right? If they were really important to you and they were value creators and value drivers, why haven't you equitized them to this point? Right.
So if you're coming into the transaction, and you've not done anything equity wise to reward the young talent on your team, don't drop that on our lap. That's not our responsibility yet.
Yeah.
Not that you wouldn't have other incentive equity type programs down the road, but for the business you've built, it's not our responsibility to equitize them.
That's right. You've got to take care of people that got you there, right? Mm-hmm. And the P&L, if you take a quick scan of the P&L, you'll see where all the money is going, right? You'll see the flow of cash, how it hits the top, what the expenses all look like, what we're spending money on, how we're choosing to run personal expenses through it or not through it. Yeah. And then at the end of the day, this thing called EBITDA that
My favorite
These
word.
businesses get valued on is at the bottom, and you see who's getting all the money.
Well, that's a good segue to my next area, which was going to be financial surprises. So, uh, what are the most common financial red flags? Not culture, not personality. If all that was great, but you look at their financials
Yeah.
and red flags that sellers might not. They don't think that matters, but it's a big deal. Like maybe give us some ideas there.
Yeah, there's a particular scenario that is just right on the top of my mind. Thanks for this question. So, it's great cultural fit. I mean, this was a great cultural fit. This team was perfect. Financial planning first, right? Really cared passionately for their clients. And when about the third or fourth meeting, we started really digging in deep to the P&L, and there was about $20,000 a month of jet fuel running through the business. Right, this is like a $500 million RIA. This isn't a $25 billion RIA, right?
Yeah.
So lots of jet fuel, and then an equal dollar amount in sporting tickets. And I
Okay.
said, okay, we're running $20,000 a month of tickets to college and professional sports. Like, take me through are these client events and
Right.
he's like, no, these are buddies that, um, they don't want to run it. They just have cash. They have cash businesses and they need to get rid of their cash. So I buy all the tickets and they reimburse me with the cash.
Oh wow.
Okay. Well, we're not signing up for
He's
500 grand a
admitting.
year of jet fuel and tickets.
Wow, wow. Well, at least he was transparent about it, what he was doing. Because
Yeah. So, I mean, you find all kinds of stuff.
fraud right on
We
the
had
first.
one, Alan. We actually had one that you were involved in early in the launch of Modern. Not that we're that old, we're only 2 years old. Just right now, turning 2 years old, and they had the dog was getting groomed weekly through the
That's right.
through the P&L. We brought it up to them and said, hey, the dog, like, I'm glad you have it cleaned, but $100 a week throughout the year, do you think you could just take that into your own personal checking
Yeah.
account? Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing what you see them run through it. And by the way, I would say most small business owners use their business
Yeah.
for some personal. That's
Yeah.
that's not abnormal.
Not at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not abnormal. It just, you're asking like red flags, what comes up in a P&L. And if you're running cell phones and meals and automobiles and dog cleaning and
Yeah.
that stuff, that's pretty typical what we find, and we can make adjustments for all that stuff, right? That gets added back,
Yeah.
and you're going to take all those expenses personally going forward, but it creates more sellable
Yeah,
EBITDA in the
it drives the
P&L.
valuation a bit. So that's why I say it's not uncommon. Is there a certain profitability metric that would make you say what's wrong here? Like
Yeah,
I find that was one of our things, and I don't want to lead the witness here, but like we see firms all the time that are like really profitable and they're proud of that and they think we're just going to be able to knock it out of the park, and we have to sort of make them aware that you're too profitable. And they're like, what do you mean too? Is there such a thing as being too profitable? And the
yes.
answer is yes. But so I teed it up for you. Why don't you explain
Yeah,
why?
it is both ways. You can be too profitable, and then you have at the other end of the spectrum where you're just overspending on something that's driving your margins to
Yeah.
literally, 20%, 15%. It's crazy to me. But yes, you can be absolutely. We see it more on the upside than the low side. But yes, if you're running over 60% EBITDA margin once we do all the recast, we're going to stand here and scratch our head and go, okay, how do we grow this thing? We're either
Yeah.
under platformed, we're not spending enough money in technology, or under resourced, we're not spending enough money on people, we're under marketing the service. Like there are big categories of expenses that, yeah, I mean, you can overwork people, you can underinvest in technology, you can underinvest in spending money on sourcing younger, newer clients, but that all strips value from the business at some point. Somebody's gonna have to come in and fix all the deferred maintenance in the business, in other words, right?
Right.
Um,
Well, that's the point. Is like where do buyers make money? And it's you correct me if you think I'm wrong, but it's in the post acquisition growth of your new partner, and that means that they have to have the capability of growing. And if they're stripping all of the money that could go to infrastructure out, they can't just like sell you an 80% profit margin business and then expect you to come back in and pour all this new capital into it while you just monetized it beyond what's rational for maintaining a respectable growth rate post deal.
yeah, the way I say it is we're paying for the past, but we're investing in the future. Right. So we're paying for your past business, what you've been able to build to this point, but we're investing capital in the future. In other words, like we're betting that your past is going to be worth more in the future and that you have capacity to grow, that you have the team in place, that you have real expenses in the P&L to create growth capacity. And that's everybody in our business, right? We're not, these are not financial transactions.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a financial transaction that money exchanges hands, equity exchanges hands. However, we're partners, right? And you don't want to strip the house of appliances before you sell it and hope to get top dollar.
Have you ever walked away from a deal purely because you felt the financials were too massaged in that regard?
Yeah, we walked away from a deal. We've walked away from multiple deals where and actually we had a seller or we had a future partner, potential partner at one point before we got too far down the path say, well, isn't that your problem? Like that's your problem to solve, not mine. And like that's
By the way, we should make another list: top 10 things not to say to your future partner. That would most probably go on the list.
yeah. If we're going to go on a journey together, we're doing it together, right? It's
Well,
your problems are our problems. They're not mine. They're not yours. They're ours. And how do we resolve them?
It's very important that people listening, how you guys think about that. Like, are we really getting a partner here? Or is this someone just simply looking to cash a check and is just going to be on autopilot afterwards? And that, I mean, I've been in these boardrooms on the buyer side, and I know, like, as the deal guy trying to convince the executive team that this is a partner that would be good here, getting tons of pushback on things like this. Like, we don't think that this is truly a long-term partner. This is just someone looking to ring the bell and is not going to do anything after the partnership, right?
Well, I'm not even going to call them your competitor because they're what you do is completely different than by far the majority of the business in your space.
Yep.
But I would call them the M&A auctioneer. And they said to me at one point, well, it's just like a real estate transaction. You're just like buying this and then it's yours. I go, no. The difference is it's a transaction. We're going to, again, exchange money, right? And but the people who currently own the home in your analogy are staying in the home and I'm moving in with them.
Right.
Like
Great.
they're not moving out. We're moving in with them. And it's not like a house transaction at all. And so
It's
if
like a
you're
marriage.
looking for, the M&A auctioneer to come and help you, good luck. Good luck finding a great partner.
Yeah, we're very vocal about auctions as a poor mechanism. It could be perfectly fine in a business that was just an asset you're disposing of. Really, all you care about is price at that point. In our business, it's a talent acquisition. I love the analogy. You're moving into the house together, which is what you do in a marriage, and so you have to treat it. So okay, let's go to operational stuff. How often this is something we see a lot when sellers they've invested in, it's kind of the opposite. They've invested in staff.
Yeah.
They got a great chance. How often do sellers overestimate the value of their team?
The team is always important. Let's start with that, right? We're rarely coming into a business where somebody's leaving as a result of the transaction, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you have A players in every position today.
Yeah.
And sometimes the team and the value of the team is something that a future partner thinks it's really important to sell the team to us, right? Look, your team is really important to you, and remember, whoever you're partnering with, if Alan's working with you, these are seasoned acquirers, right? They're people that have partnered with probably dozens, if not multiple, like 100 firms at some point in their career. And so they're going to have a pretty quick study on who the people are in the business and the value they drive. I'll just give you, we almost walked away from a transaction, like very, very close. We had signed the document to have them join, and we almost walked away from the transaction because of a particular team member.
Yeah.
And a non-owner team member
That was
that
being problematic in the transition prep.
absolutely, like we have lots of people on our side that are here to help you transition your business, and the behaviors in those transitions show the true person on the other side, right?
Yeah, the
And
honeymoon's over, and so now so we talked opening about personality issues at the partner level, but that
right,
can also manifest itself in the team when you have someone that you're, as a result of the transaction, you're inheriting their team now, and they can be equally as challenging, and so I can totally see that. You want to make sure that every team member is at least nice. They're starting to be rude or obstinate or change resistors on day one. That's not a good indicator.
well, it's not, and you have to understand, where are they coming from, right? Is it because they thought they were going to be able to buy the business themselves in the future?
Yeah.
Is it because they resent that whoever whoever the partner is that they used to work with for 10, 15, 20 years is now getting millions of dollars in consideration because of this and what they perceive to be all the hard work that they put to the business, right? So you need to understand where they're coming from, the place of the angst and anxiety and lashing out, I would say. But yeah, coach your team. Don't
Yeah.
oversell the value of your team, and know that your team's going to be well cared for if you join an organization like ours and many of our fellow acquirers across the industry.
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. All right. A couple more questions for you. What's your reaction when the owner, they're like too central to the, I'll say operations, but like it's all about them. Like they're the everything. They have their hand in everything. And do you think about that as like a risk?
Yeah, that's not a business.
Yeah.
That's a you're describing a small practice that hasn't transferred responsibility to other team members around them
Hmm.
and getting to the future partner's highest and best use. You got to, like, why did you get into the business? If you got into the business to solve problems for people, to be a good financial planner, to allocate capital, to do tax aware planning, to make sure their estate plan's in order, to make sure that the next generation of their family is cared for, like, then that should be the thing that you're doing. You shouldn't get into how did
Right.
we open accounts and how are we wiring money and what about trading and who's doing the trading and did we order coffee for the coffee bar that like.
I've been in meetings. I know you have too, with sellers, potential partners, as you'd like to say. And in the meeting, they take like 3 or 4 calls. They have to step outside the office for a second to handle an issue. It's like, do you watch yourself? Like, you can't sit down one-on-one with me for 30, 45 minutes uninterrupted without having to put five fires out. Like, I know, I call it a lifestyle practice. Like, I know that's what I'm dealing with there.
Yeah,
So,
well, that gets back to the team, right? That means you're selling me a team that you don't trust,
yeah.
right? Like, that's evidence that the people around you are not A players if you have to control every function of the firm.
I just thought, like, another way that we see this is in tenure. Like, if the team, like the longest tenured person there is 2 or 3 years, that's probably, and the guy's been in business for 20. it's probably a problem. Like it's a little very telling in terms of their personality.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. We talked about behaviors, but this is a very specific question. Like what seller behaviors during like negotiation on the valuation tend to throw up red flags?
Seller attitude. Say that again. So
It's kind of like
seller.
their attitude, but like any behaviors, things that they do during the negotiation process that throw up red flags.
Yeah, I would say, we've been involved in a lot of these now. Just be your authentic and true self from day one. Be transparent. If
Mhm.
there's don't hide things. It's going to come out, right? Just again, I'd use the word transparency. Just if there's something that you're afraid of, uh, don't avoid it. Just bring it
Mhm.
out, put it out on the table. Like again, we're going to be if it all comes together, we're going to be partners, and we're going to have to deal with it. So it's far better to deal with it in the front end than make that a deal killing moment for you 60 days, 90 days, 120 days from now. Um, I, trying to think quickly on my feet here about what that might be, but if there's a compliance issue, like let's just talk about it. If a client calls in and says, "Hey, I'm not happy," let's talk about that. Let's discuss that. How are we going to handle it? What's it going to look like? Because we are going to look at your compliance background. We are going to look at the tech stack. We are going to look at how you're using the tech stack. We are going to look about how you run money and what your diligence is around why you made the choice to
Well,
use the
I think
investment that you're
what you're
using.
what you're saying, I think, to me, it sounds like if you notice something or something comes up that is a red flag, their reaction to that is what's the telling thing. Like if they're super defensive, I mean, we're talking about what makes their baby ugly. They might not know their baby's ugly.
Yeah,
So
right.
you point
Yeah.
something out, and how receptive are they to the critique? Do they become angry? Do they lash out, like in the scenario of that employee? That to me is like the red flag. It's like during the how rational and level-headed they when you ask questions, poke, or even try to assert that this aspect of your business isn't ideal or maybe broken, and that affects your perception. Doesn't mean you won't don't want to do the deal. It just means that there's
That's
something
right.
there
We
to
have to
talk
understand it, right? We just have to
about.
understand it. And sometimes when somebody on our side of the table is asking a question, it may feel like an interrogation, and it's not an interrogation. It's just trying to gain understanding,
Yeah,
right? And the way, yeah, I like the way you put that. If they're defensive or defiant or offended or about something that comes up in the
mhm.
process, that's a sign.
That's a red flag. Yeah, but like I said, you're moving into the house with them, so you don't.
Yeah,
Just because I don't like the way you cook eggs doesn't mean I don't want to live with you. So
right. That's
I
right.
want to change something. Okay, a few more questions. Like, what do you wish sellers better understood about how you value a business? Like, um, we talked about profitability. That's not really what I'm talking about. Like, what things? Usually, when we talk valuation to a seller, we quote ranges, not like,
Yeah.
and then we try to help understand what attributes put you on the low, mid, or high end of the range. You know.
Yeah, well, the high end's easy. Well, I think you'll understand the low end and the high end is I think about it. So, uh, what is the next level of talent in your business, right? Do you have the next generation of advisor in place, and not just in place in name and title, but like, are they doing things with the client to drive client behavior and relationship management, and they're responsible for that client? It's not just somebody who sits in a meeting with a yellow pad and a pen and takes notes,
Right.
right? Like they actually have value to the
The
firm.
client sees them as an advisor, not just a
That's right. And like
associate.
you don't even need to be in the meeting.
Right.
That's the G2 advisor, where they can run a client engagement without you, and the client's satisfied, happy, and is either bringing more money to the firm or referring friends, or tells you, "Oh, I really like Sally and the way she's taking care of me." Right? That's G2 talent. So if you have it, it's a positive. If you don't have it, it's a negative.
Negative. Yep.
right?
Yeah, because you at that point you are inheriting like the guy who told you that's your problem to solve.
Right.
That would be your problem to solve then is
Right.
G2.
We're going to have to put G2 in place.
Hmm.
Because we're trying to build a business, an enterprise, right? Not a little lifestyle practice.
Hmm.
I would say advisor age and client age is something that we're taking a look at, right? It has this advisor, waited too long,
Yeah,
and
Gary, one of your partners, Gary Roth, he said this years ago, so I'm going to butcher this, but he's like, they wait until they're a couple years away, like they're 75, 80 years old, and they're going to sell it and expect to get a premium price, for that business. It's just that's one of the things that I talk about constantly with someone that's in their like they're 55 and they're like, "Oh, we're 6 years away from." I'm like, "No, no, no. You need to be
yeah,
doing this
yeah,
now. You
yeah,
need this
yeah.
is like our average partner age. I think is around 51, and I think that you're the buyer here. So, like, what age does it start to? Let's assume they didn't have Gen 2. Doesn't mean you're not interested in the business, but at
Right.
what age does it start to cause really pause for you if they don't have Gen 2?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we looked at one last week. Sellers were 63 and 65, wanted to work 3 to 4 years and ride off into the sunset. They were in a location, this gets to value as well. They were in a location where we don't have anything anywhere near them, and they're not in a major metropolitan area.
Yep.
So their location was a knock, number one. Their age was a knock, number two. That lack of G2 was a knock, number three. And they wanted a premium for the business and they wanted to exit. Well,
Yep.
like all those things, is that a sellable business? Sure. But it's not going to get a premium valuation, right?
Right.
Those are all knocks against
Well,
the
again,
value.
it goes back to, and like it's a people business, but you're investing money for a return, and your return is going to come after the acquisition. There is a component of return, just the cost of capital versus the cash flow you're buying, but that's not enough to make anybody, I think, want to do an acquisition. There's
That's
a
right.
return. There's a return element associated with the delta between your equity value versus their equity value, but that's a balance sheet item. It's not a cash flow item. It's
Yeah.
more interesting, but still not enough. It's your conviction that we're going to buy a business at 2 million, and we're going to grow them to 10 million together as partners. That's where the return comes from.
Yeah, right. If you have a $500 million practice, our goal isn't to own a $500 million practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's to turn that practice into a $2, $3, $4 billion practice. A real business in a major market with real people doing great things for more clients. Right? We've invested heavily in this thing called the Organic Growth Hub. We want to have partners who have a lot of gas left in the tank that we can send those highly curated prospects to and know that the prospect is going to say yes and they're going to accept the work that we want to do, right? So I love that your average seller is 51 years old. I happen to be 50. And I think I have a lot of I think I burn a lot of energy every week. I think I have a tremendous amount of gas left in the tank, and I want to build a great company. Well, that's what we want as partners as well, right? We
Mm-hmm.
want people that are like-minded, that have like energy, they want to be part of something. They want to build something big. They want their fingerprints and DNA spread across the business, and they want to go on an equity journey the same way I want to go on an equity journey.
Right. Yeah, they're not dilutive to the current shareholders, like with it because they want to exit. So no.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So here's an interesting question, and I know you're going to understand this very well. Like, where do sometimes sellers have invested in things that they think are highly valuable to potential acquirers?
Oh, yeah.
I'm not even going to tell you what I think they are because I think you already know. But like, where do sellers confuse potential with actual value?
Yeah. I was guilty of this, by the way. What I'm about to share, I was guilty of it. My former business partner and I were guilty of it.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Jason was an advisor before and sold his business to United Capital. So you know what you're speaking. You're not only a founder of Modern, but you were an operator advisor for many, many years. So
Yeah, I've
all
been
right.
at this 25 years, first 16 years in the advisor seat. And that was 50% of my time was at Smith Barney. That's where I got my start. And then 50% of my time in my own of that 16 years. So 8 years as an independent RIA in Northern California. Built a really nice firm. Names to Forbes magazine as one of the top 50 fastest growing firms in the country. And had a great business partner. We had a heck of a lot of fun. One of the mistakes we made was, and I see this all the time now, probably even more regularly, which is you've built some sort of technology that you think is life altering for your clients, and you've spent $1 million, $2 million, $5 million building this thing. Again, I'm guilty, and that it's going to take our business and just take it to the next level. It's the moonshot thing that I'm missing, right? I'm sorry. There's little to no value. There's no value assigned to that thing that you're really excited about. We're looking for businesses that are down the middle of the fairway, right? They're using best in industry tooling. They are using investments that make sense, that they're not so sophisticated, so unique, so individualized, right? That clients have pretty much the same allocation based on what model they're in, right? So we're looking for very consistent businesses. We're not looking for random things. If you have some, another one that we run into a lot is, well, I run a private fund and my private fund generates all this revenue. And our point to that is, and that's a compliance nightmare going forward.
And by the way, it's always interesting to me. And by the way, if you've done something, you've built technology, you've started a fund, whether we're not trying to knock your dream. I did the same thing when I had my business. I launched a hedge fund. It ended up being the single worst decision of my
right.
RIA. But it's always funny to me how when we find the firm that has something, it's usually a piece of technology or, like you said, a private placement, a fund, and then thirdly, it could be just like an investment strategy.
Right.
But there's no money in any of them. Like they got like $30 million in their fund. And it's like you said, it's going to be the thing that revolutionizes the buyer's business, or the investment strategy. They have it staffed up. It's great, but it's only got $50 million in it. And if we could just get another $100 million in it, it'd be profitable. But we want you to pay they want you to pay like this high multiple on something that's a loss. It's losing money now,
Right.
Not forget the compliance headache and the risk that it brings to your business. It's not a moneymaker.
Yeah.
So I would say that on occasion we do find someone that's just a pure publicly traded, no private placement structure, anything like that. And it's an interesting strategy. And sometimes buyers would say, look, that's something really cool that we might add to our platform, but there's very little value there. You're not going to get a bump in your valuation for it. It's just, we might be able to create some kind of revenue share post acquisition, but if
maybe it gets distributed across the firm, but it's just another tool in the firm's toolbox.
Right.
Okay. There was one more, Alan. There's one, now that you were talking about that, there was a gentleman, I'm not going to say where he was, but east of the Mississippi, north of, let's say, Tennessee, up in that part of the world, right? So that's a big part of the country.
Yeah.
Could be anybody. And this gentleman had a marketing thing that he thought was just amazing. And it was generating about $25 million of AUM, his workshop concept, right? And he said, well, when I join Modern, I want to teach, coach, train, mentor advisors on how to deliver my thing. And I would like an override on the action that gets generated from my thing, right? Well, it was a great thing for him, but plugging that into, like, that's part of becoming a partner of a firm. It's bringing your best thinking and best ideas to the firm. Remember, you're going to be an equity holder here. You want the thing to go up in value. So, like, that's your big kicker. It's not scraping basis points off of some marketing thing.
He wants to double dip.
That just, like, again, we're paying for the past, investing in the future, betting on the future, and come here and be an open book and willingness, being willing to help people grow. But he really was putting a lot of value on this thing that generated 25 million of new AUM every year.
That's nice, but that's not there's plenty of things that
Yeah.
or exceed that. So anyway, okay. Touch on a few more topics. Legal compliance. Are there any legal compliance issues that come up more often that sellers don't think are a big deal, but actually are? And why are they a big deal?
Yeah, look, we're going to do a compliance check. We're going to do a background check. Things are going to come to the surface. Again, that word transparency, just be transparent. Know that it's going to come up. And the reason it's important is when you're building a national firm or a bigger business, it's not that you're going to be able to build a business with zero compliance issues across, a few hundred advisors, but the fewer the fewer you have, the better it is for the overall business. And we certainly don't want to bring partners in that are carrying forward lots of compliance background issue that is going to kind of mucky up our ADV, right? Because at some
that could
point, we're
affect
going to
your
need to raise
goal.
capital. At some point, we want to have an equity outcome. At some point, somebody's going to be doing diligence on our business. And you don't have to be absolutely perfect, zero compliance, but
Well, the
it needs to
nature, like,
be pretty limited and it needs to be pretty minor if there is an issue.
yeah, the big issue, as you point out, is do you have to report that on your ADV now?
Yeah.
And again, it's not that you're saying they're a bad person or did something terrible. It's just it could be a impairment to the existing shareholders, and that's just not a risk or something your shareholders would want you to take.
It's
And
not
so,
necessary for us to take that risk. Like,
got yeah. So
yeah.
transparency is a big thing. Okay, last question. If you could give sellers one piece of advice to avoid like deal breaking types of surprises, what would it be?
One piece of advice to avoid deal breaking. mm, 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 mm.
It's a big one.
Uh, One piece of advice. This is a tough question, Alan. Again, I would be transparent. I'd be thorough. I would be honest. I would be. I'd be. I wouldn't wait for questions to come that I'm uncomfortable answering. I would just address those head on right
Yeah, let me
before they
let
got
me tell you
asked.
about XYZ so we get it out there and open and
Yep.
discuss it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
And be open. In other words, we had somebody we just went through this. We literally just went through this where somebody was telling us, "Oh yeah, that's what I want to be. I want to be just like you. I want to be just like you. I want to do it your way. I want to that's the client experience I want. That's the way I want to allocate capital." And then when it came down to the LOI and signing it, the brakes got hit really hard and it was like, "No, I still really like to run my independent portfolio. I still think that's the right way to work with the client." And I'm glad we figured it out before we got to the LOI executed and we spent a lot of money. But just be
that
honest
should
from
have
the
come out
beginning.
way before the LOI.
That should have been
Yeah.
meeting one or two, like on the table. This is what I want.
Yeah, that's that. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, look, great interview. I knew this was going to be fun, and there was a lot of wisdom in there, like for people who are really want to understand how buyers think. So and those there were many. We went through more than 10, I think, things that make
Yeah.
your baby potentially ugly. But
Well, remember, mine is the dirty dozen.
that's right. All right, Jason Gordo with Modern Wealth Management, one of the top fastest growing firms in the business today. You guys are crushing it. What are you, like 2 years old and you're already approaching 10 billion or so?
24 months, April of 25. And yeah, we're having a hell of a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
And we're excited to find great partners across the country.
Well, we hope to bring you many of those, my friend.
We're ready.
All right, all right.
Cool. And we're back. That was an awesome interview. Love Jason Gordo. Did you know he was my when I was at United Capital, the first acquisition I worked on
Was
there.
Jason?
So
No,
many, many
I
moons
did not know
ago.
that.
Yeah,
No.
it's just Gordo. Actually, both of his
Yeah,
firms.
well, he
So
and I,
yeah.
when United launched Fin Life, he was the guy that they kind of tagged along with Clive Charlton to go around the country and promote it. And so I've been on many,
Yeah.
many presentations with Jason, and I can say he's one of the best in the business. So
Absolutely. Great guy. We've got a little mailbag here if you're open to
take it.
that. Okay. So listener writes in, thinking of hiring an advisor, already have a few offers from buyers in hand. Am I going to piss them off by hiring an M&A sell-side advisor?
Great question.
You might.
Yeah.
No.
Let's say this:
Yeah.
they're not going to be thrilled, when a buyer, and these are all great people, right? I remember when we were at United, Jacqueline, we would much prefer to engage one-on-one with a seller that did not have an advisor
Right.
in their camp. The reason why is because when you have an advisor, they're going to expose you to a large number of buyers, so it's competitive, and
Mhm.
all things being equal, as the buyer, I wouldn't want competition involved. If you're a firm that I really want, I'd rather just be working with you one-on-one. Okay. So they're not going to be thrilled. However, I would say the good buyers understand this very well, and they're big boys and girls. And well, put it this way: when when buyers raise capital, what's the first thing they do? Hire an advisor.
Hire
Yeah,
advisor.
yeah.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
are experts at M&A. They know what they're doing, but still they hire an external advisor to lead the process. So
Mhm.
any buyer that would have a problem with you as a seller hiring an advisor, it's sort of hypocritical, because ask them, did you hire a banker when you raised your money? And the answer is yes. So
Right. Fair
yeah, I
point.
would say that they're not going to be thrilled, but the good mature buyers are totally going to understand. They're not going to withdraw their offer from you. If anything, when we've had this happen a number of times, when a seller is engaged with a couple buyers, they've gotten offers like this gentleman here apparently, um, and they hire us. Okay, the least we've been able to improve an offer is 25%. That's the lowest.
Mhm.
It's usually higher than that,
Right.
and that's just the valuation, not including the terms and things like that associated with it. So, I would say,
Exactly.
well, one, we're biased because we are advisors. So yes, I think you should hire an advisor, but you're not going to they're not going to be thrilled, but they're not going to walk. And if they
Right.
did walk because you hired an advisor, I would run from them like the plague. Because
Right.
they're not.
Kind of insinuates that they'd want to take
Yes.
advantage of you and only have your attention, that sort of thing, versus wanting you to have like a fair deal, the best deal, and the right
That's right.
fit.
That's right. I think, and another, I would think the advisor you hire is really important. It's becoming more and more common, at least I'm hearing it from buyers, that who you hire as an advisor is maybe more problematic than hiring an advisor, period, if that makes sense. Because there
Mhm.
are some advisors, particularly the ones that are running auctions, that they really dislike working with because the process that they run um, is frankly horrible. And so, who you hire as advisor is a very important piece of this too. So that's my answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect.
All
Love
right.
it. Well, that's a wrap.
Thank you. It was awesome.
Mhm.
All right.
All right. We'll see
Thanks,
you soon.
Jacqueline. Cheers.